You are paid to serve him, not to love him, the billionaire hissed, his voice like ice. He snatched the crying baby from the maid's arms.
Oh,
But
no,
the
no,
instant the
no.
child left her warmth, his cries escalated into screams of pure terror. The maid, a quiet black woman who had endured his cruelty for weeks, simply held out her arms. "He doesn't know you're rich, sir," she said, her voice soft but unbreakable. "He just knows who feels like home." To the silent, silver-haired staff of the Grayson estate, she was an enigma. Maya Williams, a 38-year-old black woman with eyes that seemed to hold a deep, quiet sorrow, had been hired 3 weeks ago. Her role was nebulous, part nanny, part nurse, part caregiver to the infant son of the formidable Nate Grayson. Her predecessor, a highly credentialed pediatric nurse, had lasted less than a month, driven away by the impossible task of caring for a child who could not, be soothed. The Grayson mansion was less a home and more a monument to modern, minimalist grief. Perched on a cliff overlooking the turbulent Atlantic, its vast, glass walls seemed designed to let in the cold, gray light, but keep out any trace of human warmth. It was the kingdom of Nate Grayson, a 42-year-old tech billionaire who had built his empire on cold, hard logic and ruthless efficiency. He was a man who had solved the world's most complex problems, but was utterly powerless against the inconsolable cries of his own 6-month-old son, Liam. The accident had happened 8 months ago. A slick road, a drunk driver, a catastrophic collision. Nate had survived with minor injuries. His wife, Claire, had not, and their son, Liam, born just 2 months before, had been left with a severe spinal cord injury, his tiny legs still and unresponsive. Since that day, the house had been filled with two sounds: the endless, desperate wailing of the infant and the cold, oppressive silence of his father. Maya moved through this world like a ghost. Her uniform was a simple black dress, her movements economical and quiet. She spoke only when necessary, her voice a low, calming murmur that seemed to be the only thing that could momentarily quiet the storm of Liam's distress. The other staff, the stern, white-haired housekeeper Mrs. Delaney, the bustling, kind-eyed Chinese cook, Rosa, watched her with a mixture of pity and awe. They had seen a parade of experts fail. This quiet, unassuming woman was their last hope. The crisis, which had been simmering for weeks, came to a head on a Tuesday night. Maya had been up for nearly 48 hours straight, a rocking, humming, constant presence in the sterile, state-of-the-art nursery. Liam had finally, blessedly, fallen asleep, his small, fragile body curled against her chest, his breathing synced to the steady, quiet rhythm of her own heartbeat. He would not sleep in his expensive, sensor-laden crib. He would only sleep when held. The nursery door hissed open. Nate Grayson stood there, his face a mask of sleepless fury, his perfectly tailored suit rumpled. "What do you think you're doing?" he snapped, his voice ablaze in the quiet room. "I pay you to care for him, not to coddle him. Put him in his crib." Maya didn't flinch. She kept her voice low, a shield to protect the sleeping child. "He won't sleep in the crib, Mr. Grayson. He needs to be held. He needs to feel a heartbeat." "That is sentimental nonsense," Nate spat, striding into the room. "He needs to adapt to his reality. Give him to me." Without waiting for a reply, he reached down and lifted Liam from Maya's arms. The transition was a violent severing of a connection. The instant Liam left the warmth and steady rhythm of Maya's chest, his tiny body went rigid. His eyes flew open, not with the gentle waking of a comforted child, but with the stark, blind terror of an infant in freefall. A raw, piercing scream tore from his lungs, a sound of pure, unadulterated panic that seemed to shake the very glass walls of the room. "Shoo, Liam, it's Daddy," Nate said, his own movements awkward and stiff as he tried to pat the baby's back. "You are fine." But Liam was not fine. His wails escalated, his face turning a deep, alarming red, his tiny, useless legs kicking spasmodically. He was not just crying. He was terrified. Maya stood up slowly. The exhaustion of the past 2 days was a heavy weight on her shoulders, but her voice, when she spoke, was clear and firm, stripped of any deference. "Give him back to me, sir." Nate glared at her, his jaw tight with a mixture of anger and a humiliating, undeniable helplessness. "I am his father. And you are scaring him," Maya countered, holding out her arms. He doesn't know you are a billionaire. He doesn't know you own this house. He knows the sound of my heart. He knows the warmth of my arms. Right now, that is the only home he has. Give him back. For a long, tense moment, the two of them stood in a silent battle of wills, the only sound the baby's tortured screams. Nate looked from the thrashing, terrified infant in his arms to the quiet, resolute woman before him. He, a man who commanded boardrooms and moved markets with a single word, was utterly defeated by a 6-month-old and a maid. With a final, frustrated sigh that was almost a groan of surrender, he thrust the baby back into Maya's arms. The moment Liam was back against her chest, the change was instantaneous. He burrowed his face into the familiar curve of her shoulder, his frantic screams immediately subsiding into ragged, hiccuping sobs. Maya began to hum, a low, wordless lullaby, and started to rock gently, her body a human cradle. Within a minute, the sobs faded, and the baby's breathing settled, once again finding the steady, life-affirming rhythm of her heart. Nate stood and watched, a silent, invisible wall between him and his own son. He had everything in the world, but in that moment, he knew he possessed nothing of value. The quiet, unassuming woman in the black dress held the only thing that mattered, the only thing he could not buy, command, or control, his son's peace. The silent war was over, and he had lost. Or perhaps, in the profound, humbling silence that followed, he had just begun to understand what he needed to win. The aftermath of the confrontation in the nursery left a new kind of silence in the Grayson estate. Not the cold, empty silence of before, but a heavy, watchful quiet, filled with unspoken truths. Nate Grayson retreated, leaving Maya to her quiet, steadfast care of his son. He did not apologize, nor did he issue new commands. He simply disappeared behind the closed door of his home office, a ghost in his own house, leaving the gravitational center of the home to shift from the master suite to the small, warm nursery. Maya, in turn, did not press her advantage. She had not sought a victory, only the well-being of the child. She established a new, unbroken routine. She spent her nights in the comfortable rocking chair, holding Liam, her own sleep coming in brief, shallow bursts. During the day, she moved with him through the vast, empty rooms, a small, two-person universe against the cold, minimalist backdrop. She knew, with a certainty that was bone-deep, that what the boy needed was not just care, but constancy. He needed to know that the warmth and the heartbeat he depended on would not vanish. The other staff members observed this new dynamic with a quiet, cautious respect. Mrs. Delaney, the housekeeper, began leaving a thermos of hot chamomile tea outside the nursery door for Maya each evening. Rosa, the cook, started preparing Maya small, nourishing meals she could eat with one hand while holding the sleeping baby. They were small gestures of solidarity, a silent acknowledgement from the house's other invisible women that they recognized the battle she had won. "Be careful, child," Mrs. Delaney whispered to her one afternoon as she collected an empty tray. Her voice was low, her eyes filled with a worry that came from decades of service to powerful, unpredictable men. A man like Mr. Grayson, he does not know how to be grateful. He only knows how to be in charge. When a man like that feels powerless, he can become dangerous. "I'm not here for him," Maya replied, her gaze never leaving the sleeping child in her arms. "I'm here for Liam." Nate, meanwhile, was wrestling with demons he had long kept locked away. His office, a marvel of technology with screens displaying global market data and investment algorithms, offered no solution to the simple, human problem down the hall. He had built an empire by solving complex problems, by seeing the world as a system to be optimized. But his son was not a system. He was a small, broken child who responded not to data, but to a woman's quiet humming. He began to watch. He would review the nursery's security camera footage, not to monitor Maya's work, but to try and understand her magic. He watched her for hours, seeing the endless, patient rocking, the gentle way she spoke to Liam, the soft, wordless lullabies she would hum. He saw her own exhaustion, the dark circles under her eyes, the way she would sometimes rest her head against the back of the rocking chair, her own body a fortress of comfort for his son. He saw the way Liam, even in sleep, would sometimes reach out a tiny hand to touch her face, a silent, instinctual gesture of connection. It was a connection Nate had never felt with his own child. The realization was a cold, sharp blade in his heart. His grief for his wife, which he had buried under a mountain of work and anger, was inextricably linked to his guilt over his son. He had failed them both. One afternoon, driven by a desperation he couldn't name, he left his office and walked to the nursery. Maya was sitting on the floor, propped up by pillows, with Liam asleep on her chest. The room was quiet, peaceful. "There's a new prototype for the Unity app," he said, his voice sounding loud and clumsy in the quiet space. He held out a tablet. "My development team. They're struggling with the user interface. They're all engineers. They don't understand the target demographic." Maya looked from the sleeping child to the tablet, then to Nate's face. She saw the exhaustion, the desperation, the silent plea for help that he was too proud to voice. "He needs to sleep," she said simply. "Of course," Nate stammered, retreating. "I'm sorry to disturb you." He left, and Maya knew that this, too, was a test. He was not just asking for her professional opinion. He was asking if the door to their separate worlds could be opened. That night, after she had settled Liam and was sure he was in a deep sleep, she slipped out of the nursery and went to the kitchen to make a cup of tea. She found Nate there, staring at the dark, turbulent ocean through the massive kitchen window. On the counter lay the tablet. She picked it up. The app's interface was clean, corporate, and completely soulless. It was filled with complex sign-up forms, technical jargon, and cold, impersonal graphics. It was an app designed by people who had never known the sheer, bone-deep terror of being alone with a sick child in the middle of the night. "This won't work," she said quietly. Nate turned from the window. "Why not?" "Because it asks for information before it offers help," she said. "When you are desperate, when your hands are shaking and your child is screaming, you don't have the strength to fill out a 5-page registration form. You have the strength for one thing." She pointed to the center of the screen. "One button. That's all. It should be right here, and it should say help now." She continued, her voice gaining a quiet, certain power. "And it needs to be anonymous. You cannot ask a terrified mother to give you her name and address before you offer her a lifeline. You must offer the help first and build the trust later. And you need a voice option, because sometimes all a person has left is the sound of their own voice." Nate listened, his expression unreadable. He had spent millions on market research, on user experience design, on the best and brightest minds in tech. And in 5 minutes, the woman who cared for his child had just given him more actionable, human-centered insight than his entire team had in 5 months. "The board will say it's a liability risk," he said, the old arguments of his corporate world sounding weak even to his own ears. "Then your board doesn't understand your business," Maya replied. "You are not selling a product. You are trying to build a community. And a community begins with trust, not with a liability waiver." She placed the tablet back on the counter. "Liam is stirring," she said, already moving towards the door. "I need to go to him." She left Nate standing alone in the vast, dark kitchen, the quiet truth of her words echoing in the silence. He looked from the soulless app on the screen to the hallway where the woman who understood everything had just disappeared. For the first time, he realized he wasn't just fighting to fix his son. He was fighting to fix himself. And he knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and liberating, that he could not do it alone. Maya's words in the kitchen that night became a quiet turning point. The impenetrable fortress of Nate Grayson's grief and anger had been breached, not by force, but by the simple, undeniable truth of her insight. He began to change, not with a grand, dramatic transformation, but in a series of small, almost imperceptible shifts. He started knocking, a soft, hesitant rap on the nursery door before entering. He would stand in the doorway for a few minutes each evening, simply watching Maya rock his son, a silent student observing a master at work. He stopped bringing tablets and business proposals, and instead, just watched the quiet, human rhythm of the room. The Unity app, too, began to transform. Nate, in a move that shocked his high-powered development team, called an emergency virtual meeting. He didn't just relay Maya's suggestions. He channeled her voice, her quiet authority. "Our entire user interface is wrong," he stated to the screen of stunned, well-paid faces. "We've been building this like a product to be sold, But it's not. It's a lifeline. We are starting over. One button on the home screen. Help now. All registration is to be moved to the back end after a connection is made. And we will build a voice note function. Anonymity is no longer a feature. It is the core principle. The team was bewildered. This was a complete reversal of months of work, a rejection of every data-driven metric they had followed. But there was a new, unfamiliar conviction in their CEO's voice, a tone that was less about market share and more about a mission. The project, for the first time, had found its heart. Meanwhile, in the quiet world of the mansion, a fragile truce was forming. Maya found that her path was now a little easier. Mrs. Delaney would ensure a small pot of her favorite jasmine tea was always brewing. Rosa would leave plates of food covered in the warming drawer, simple, hearty meals that spoke a language of quiet support. They were small acts, but in a house built on silence, they were a chorus. The real test came on a wild, storm-lashed night a week later. A fierce nor'easter hammered the coast, and the power in the mansion, despite its state-of-the-art generators, flickered and died. The house was plunged into a deep, primal darkness, the only sounds the howling of the wind and the crashing of the waves against the cliffs below. The emergency lights, a dim, ghostly green, were just enough to see by. The staff had gone home hours before, warned of the coming storm. It was just Nate, Maya, and Liam, alone in the vast, dark house. Liam, sensing the change in the atmosphere, began to stir and fuss. Maya, who had been dozing in the rocking chair, was instantly awake. The nursery was cold, the high-tech heating system now useless. She went to the kitchen to heat a bottle, expecting to find Nate on a satellite phone, barking orders to his infrastructure team. Instead, she found him fumbling with a small camping stove on the massive marble island, his face illuminated by the flickering flame. He looked utterly out of his element, a king trying to light a fire with two sticks. He looked up as she entered, a rare, embarrassed flush on his cheeks. "The generator's backup fuel line is frozen," he said. "I'm trying to boil some water." Maya didn't laugh. She simply took a blanket from a nearby chair and wrapped it around her own shoulders, then took another and went to him, draping it over his. "The flame is too high," she said quietly. "You'll scorch the pan." She gently adjusted the knob. "And you need a smaller pot. It will heat faster." For the next hour, they worked together in the quiet, candlelit kitchen. They boiled water, warmed Liam's bottle, and made themselves cups of instant coffee. In the shared, simple task of survival, the vast social and economic gulf between them seemed to disappear. They were just two people, in the dark, trying to keep a child warm. "I'm not very good at this," Nate admitted, stirring his coffee. The domestic part. Claire, my wife, she was the one who made this place a home. I just paid for it." It was the first time he had spoken of his wife to her. Maya simply listened, her silence an invitation. She would have known what to do tonight, he continued, his voice low. She would have had candles ready. She would have been humming, not worrying. She was the heartbeat of this house. He looked up at Maya, his eyes filled with a raw, unguarded pain. "And now it's just quiet, except for Liam. And you." "I am not her," Maya said gently, but without pity. "And you cannot ask me to be." "I know," he said, shaking his head. "That's not what I mean. I mean, thank you for not letting him be alone in the quiet." They sat in silence for a long time, the storm raging outside, a small pocket of warmth and fragile trust forming between them. The power did not return until morning. When it did, something had been permanently reset. The next day, Nate made a quiet request. "The Unity team needs to hear from you directly," he said. "Not just my notes. They need to hear your voice. Would you be willing to join a video call? As a paid consultant?" Maya looked at Liam, who was now babbling happily in his playpen, his tiny, still legs a constant, heartbreaking reminder of the world's fragility. She had been invisible for so long. The thought of stepping into the light, of speaking to a room full of powerful, educated people, was terrifying. But then she thought of the other Mayas of the world, the other invisible women in the basements and the dark kitchens, the ones whose wisdom was never sought. "Yes," she said, "I will." The video call was a trial by fire. Maya, patched in from the quiet nursery, found herself facing a screen of 6 impeccably dressed, skeptical faces. They were the lead engineers, the designers, the legal team. They saw a maid, a caregiver, a woman with no credentials. So, the lead designer, a sharp woman with an even sharper haircut, began, "Nate tells us you have some insights into our user experience." Maya took a deep breath. She did not talk about data or metrics. She talked about fear. She talked about the feeling of a baby's forehead, hot with fever at 3 a.m. She talked about the shaking hands of a mother trying to type a search query. She talked about the shame that keeps a person from asking for help until it's almost too late. "Your app is a tool," she finished, her voice clear and unwavering. "But the people you are trying to reach are not users. They are human beings, and they are at the end of their rope. You need to build them a hand to hold, not another form to fill out." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. The faces on the screen, which had started with expressions of polite dismissal, now looked thoughtful, humbled. "Thank you, Maya," the designer said, her voice softer now. "That was more helpful than a dozen focus groups." The door had been opened, and Maya Williams, the quiet woman with the sad eyes and the steady heart, had just walked through it. Maya's video call with the Unity development team became a quiet legend at Grayson Innovations. Her insights, born not from data but from lived experience, fundamentally shifted the project's direction. The app was stripped of its cold, corporate shell and rebuilt around a single, powerful principle: empathy. The Help Now button became the centerpiece. The anonymous voice note function, which legal had initially fought, was now a non-negotiable feature. Maya, the consultant from the nursery, had become the project's unexpected soul. Nate, true to his word, formalized her role. She was given a title, Community Insights Advisor, a generous salary, and a dedicated tablet, but she refused an office at the gleaming corporate headquarters. "My office is here," she had told him, gesturing to the nursery. "This is where the real data is." Their lives settled into a new, strange rhythm. By day, Maya was a key voice in a billion-dollar tech project, her calls with engineers and designers a masterclass in human-centered design. By night, she was simply Maya, the woman who held a fragile child, her quiet humming the steady, anchoring heartbeat of the house. The line between employee and something more was blurring, creating a space that neither Maya nor Nate knew how to define. He began to join her in the evenings, not as a boss, but as a student. He would sit in the nursery, watching her care for Liam, learning the simple, profound rituals of fatherhood. He learned how to warm a bottle to the perfect temperature, how to fold a blanket just so, how to hold his own son not with the awkward stiffness of a stranger, but with a growing, tender confidence. He was a man learning a foreign language, and the language was love. "His physical therapists say he's more responsive," Nate said one evening, watching as Liam, now in his arms, reached out a tiny hand to touch his face. "They say his muscle tone is improving. They think it's because he's happier." The admission was a quiet earthquake, a complete repudiation of his former belief in pure, cold science. He was admitting that a feeling, a simple, unquantifiable emotion, was healing his son in a way that medicine could not. "He feels safe," Maya said, her gaze soft. "That's the best medicine there is." But just as a fragile sense of peace began to settle over the house, the outside world, which had long been held at bay, came crashing in. The catalyst was Claire's family, the powerful, old money Morgans, who had never approved of Nate, the new money tech genius. They had blamed him for the accident, for their daughter's death, and now they saw an opportunity to strike. The first blow came in the form of a vicious article in a high-society gossip magazine. A series of long-lens photos showed Maya in the garden with Liam, and one, taken through a window, showed Nate in the nursery, his hand resting on Maya's shoulder. The headline was a masterpiece of insinuation: "Grieving billionaire replaces late wife with the nanny." The article painted Nate as a negligent, callous father who had pawned off his disabled son to an unqualified, mysterious woman while he focused on his business. Nate was apoplectic. He wanted to sue, to unleash his army of lawyers, to burn the magazine to the ground. But Maya, who had seen this kind of attack before, was calm. "This isn't about the truth, Mr. Grayson," she said, looking at the glossy, cruel pages. "This is about a narrative, and right now, they are the ones writing it." The narrative was a powerful one. The Morgans filed a petition for emergency custody of Liam, claiming Nate was an unfit father who was exposing his vulnerable child to an unstable and inappropriate home environment. They used Maya's lack of formal credentials, her mysterious past, and the very nature of her constant, loving care as weapons against them. She never leaves the child's side, their lawyer argued in a preliminary hearing. It's an unhealthy, obsessive attachment. The boy needs professional, medicalized care, not the smothering attention of a hired servant. The world that had once been confined to the walls of the mansion now expanded to include courtrooms and lawyers. Nate's carefully ordered life was thrown into chaos. He was forced to defend his every decision, his every action. And at the center of the storm was Maya. She knew what she had to do. "I will leave," she told Nate one evening, after a brutal day of depositions. "If my presence here is what is hurting Liam, if they are using me to take him from you, then I will go." Nate looked at her, then at his son, who was sleeping peacefully in his crib for the first time without being held, a milestone they had reached just the week before. "No," he said, his voice raw with a new, unfamiliar emotion. "If you leave, they will have already won. They will have taken the heart out of this house. We are not going to run. We are going to fight. Together." It was the first time he had ever used the word we. The custody battle became a public spectacle. The Morgans, with their immense social influence, painted a picture of a cold, unfeeling father and a mysterious, manipulative caregiver. But they made one critical mistake. They underestimated Nate Grayson's greatest strength. He was a master of systems, of information, of technology. And he turned that formidable arsenal to a new purpose, telling the truth. He didn't fight them in the gossip columns. He fought them with data. He released the usage statistics for the Unity app, showing how its new, Maya-inspired features had helped thousands of families in crisis. He submitted Liam's medical records, which showed a marked improvement in the boy's health and responsiveness since Maya's arrival. He had his entire household staff, from Mrs. Delaney to Rosa, give sworn affidavits testifying to Maya's incredible skill and devotion. But the final, decisive battle would be fought in the courtroom. And the Morgans had a star witness, the pediatric nurse who had quit after the first month, a woman who was prepared to testify that Liam was a hopeless case and that Maya's methods were unprofessional and potentially dangerous. Nate knew that everything hinged on what would happen on the stand. He knew he needed more than just data. He needed a story. And he knew that the only person who could tell it was Maya. "I can't," she said, her voice filled with a fear he had never seen before. "I can't go in front of all those people and have them pick apart my life." "You don't have to," Nate said, his voice gentle. "You just have to do what you have always done. You just have to tell them the truth about Liam." The day of the custody hearing arrived, a cold, sterile morning that mirrored the atmosphere inside the courtroom. The room was packed with reporters, lawyers, and the stern, judgmental faces of the Morgan clan. Nate Grayson sat at one table, a fortress of quiet fury in a perfectly tailored suit. Beside him, Maya Williams sat in a simple, dark blue dress, a picture of calm and quiet dignity. She was not there as a defendant or a nanny. She was there as a witness to a child's truth. The Morgan's lawyer was slick and merciless. He called the former pediatric nurse to the stand, who painted a grim picture of a disturbed and inconsolable child. She testified that Maya's methods were unorthodox and lacked any medical basis, insinuating that her constant holding of the baby was a sign of emotional instability. When it was Maya's turn to take the stand, the opposing lawyer approached her like a predator. "Ms. Williams," he began, his voice dripping with condescension. "You have no formal training in pediatric nursing, is that correct?" "That is correct," Maya replied, her voice even. "You have no degree in child development? No certifications in physical therapy?" "No." "So, you are, for all intents and purposes, simply the maid. A woman hired to clean the house and watch the child." "I was hired to care for Liam," Maya corrected him gently. "And that is what I have done." "And you believe your care," the lawyer said, wrapping the word in invisible quotation marks, "is superior to that of a board-certified pediatric nurse and a team of the nation's top specialists." Maya did not look at the lawyer. She looked directly at the judge, a stern, older woman who had been watching the proceedings with an unreadable expression. "I do not believe my care is superior to medicine," she said, her voice clear and resonant in the silent courtroom. I believe it is a necessary partner to it. You can give a child the best medicine in the world, but if you do not make him feel safe, he will not heal. You can put him in the most advanced crib, but if he does not feel a human heartbeat, he will not sleep. Liam was not a hopeless case. He was a terrified, grieving baby who had lost his mother and was trapped in a body that wouldn't obey him. He was not crying because he was difficult. He was crying because he was alone. She then spoke directly about Liam, not as a medical case, but as a person. She described the way he learned to respond to the sound of her humming, the way he would calm when she rocked him in a specific rhythm, the way he had, just last week, managed to grip her finger for the first time. She wasn't presenting a legal argument. She was telling a story of human connection. You cannot measure a child's sense of safety on a chart, she concluded. You cannot quantify the healing power of a lullaby, but you can see it. You can feel it. And if you had spent one night in that house, you would know that what that little boy needed was not another specialist. He needed someone to stay with him in the dark. The courtroom was utterly still. The slick, cynical arguments of the Morgan's lawyer seemed to evaporate in the face of her simple, profound truth. The judge looked at Maya for a long, silent moment. Then, she turned to Nate. "Mr. Grayson," she said, "please bring your son into the courtroom." A murmur went through the room. It was a highly unorthodox request. A few minutes later, Nate entered, holding Liam in his arms. The baby, who had been calm with his father, looked out at the sea of strange faces, and his lower lip began to tremble. A small, distressed cry escaped him. "Ms. Williams," the judge said, "please go to the child." Maya stepped down from the witness stand and walked to Nate. She didn't take the baby. She simply stood beside them and began to hum her soft, wordless lullaby, placing a gentle hand on Liam's back. The effect was immediate. Liam's cry subsided. He leaned his head against his father's shoulder, his eyes fixed on Maya, and a look of pure, peaceful recognition washed over his face. He was home. The judge looked at the scene before her. The father, the caregiver, the peaceful child. A perfect, undeniable trinity of care. "I have seen enough," she said, her voice ringing with finality. "The petition for a change in custody is denied. It is clear to this court that the child is in a safe, stable, and profoundly loving environment." Case dismissed. The victory in court was not an end, but a beginning. The media storm, which had been so vicious, now turned in their favor. The story was no longer Billionaire and the Nanny. It was a story of a father learning to care, of a woman whose quiet wisdom had healed a broken family, of a new definition of what it meant to be a parent. Nate Grayson, in a move that shocked the corporate world, did not retreat into his private life. He leaned in. At a press conference, with Maya by his side, he announced the formation of the Claire Morgan Grayson Foundation, a massive nonprofit dedicated to supporting caregivers and families of children with disabilities. And he announced its first director, Maya Williams. "For the past year," he said to the sea of cameras, "I have had the privilege of learning from a true expert. Not an expert in finance or technology, but an expert in empathy, in patience, in love. Maya Williams taught me that the greatest innovations are not technological, but human. She is the heart of this foundation, and she will be its voice." Maya, who had never sought the spotlight, now found herself in its warm, bright glare. But she did not use it for herself. She used it to speak for the other Mayas, the other invisible women whose quiet, essential work was so often overlooked. She built a new kind of organization, one based on the principles she had brought to the Grayson home. Listen first, offer help without asking for anything in return, and build a community of trust. Their own home transformed as well. The cold, minimalist mansion slowly filled with warmth. The walls were painted in soft, welcoming colors. A well-worn, comfortable sofa replaced a sleek, architectural one. And the nursery, once a sterile medical suite, became a child's joyful, messy room, filled with books and toys and the sound of laughter. One evening, nearly a year after the trial, Nate came home to find Maya and a now toddling Liam on the floor of the living room, building a tower of blocks. Liam, whose legs were still weak but were now responding to intensive therapy, was able to sit up on his own, his laughter a bright, beautiful sound. Nate sat on the floor beside them, not as the owner of the house, but simply as a man joining his family. He reached into his pocket, and pulled out a small, simple box. "I am not a man who is good with words," he began, his voice quiet and sincere. "I have spent my life building systems and solving problems. But you are not a problem to be solved. You are a miracle to be lived." He opened the box. Inside was a simple, elegant ring. "I am not asking you to be my wife," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "I am asking you to be my partner. In raising this boy, in building this foundation, in this life. I am asking you to stay." Maya looked from the ring to the man she had come to know, a man who had been rebuilt from the inside out by the love of his son. She looked at Liam, who was now clapping his hands, a perfect, beautiful child. She thought of the long, dark nights and the quiet, steady rhythm of her own heart that had been his first home. "Yes," she said, her voice soft but unbreakable. "I will stay." Her answer was not just for him. It was a promise to the child, to the life they were building, and to the quiet, powerful truth she had always known, that the greatest strength is not in building walls to keep the world out, but in opening a door and creating a home, one steady heartbeat at a time. What is the true measure of a home? Is it the wealth within its walls, or the warmth in the arms that hold you? And how many of us have been saved, not by grand gestures, but by the quiet, constant presence of someone who simply chose to stay? If this story about the quiet power of care moved you, please like, subscribe, and share. You never know whose steady heartbeat might be waiting to change the world.